Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Logocentric. My name is Daxton Page, and today we are going to be talking about what kind of reforms I would at least like to see in the education system. Welcome back to another episode, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Make sure you like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell since the subscribe button basically does nothing according to YouTube algorithms. So please do that and support the show. Anyway, let's get into it. What kind of things do I think the education system needs improving on? Well, just a couple of things. I'm going to rely a lot on my own personal experience going through a public school system, as well as personal experiences with family members who went through things like charter schools and their experiences and results with that. And I'm just going to kind of dive into what I think is wrong with the education system in certain areas, and I'm not going to have a full diagnosis on everything that's wrong with the education system, mainly the public school system, but I'm going to at least be able to hopefully outline some issues that I feel are relevant. So, everyone remember AR points? You remember those things back in the day? You read a book and then you go take a test on a computer. Back then it was those really old Macs. At least that's what it was in my school. Maybe, I was a more fortunate school to have an old school Mac in the classroom. But anyway, you would go and take these tests and you would be given points based on how well you did answering multiple choice questions about the book that you read. It's really a good system on paper. One of the things it failed in, I think, was biased implementation of points. What do I mean by that? I mean that certain books were worth more points for arbitrary reasons, and for instance, things like nonfiction books were ranked lower in the AR system point area. You know, you would read a really dense nonfiction book and get 10, 15 points, and you'd read a really dense fiction book and get 20, 30, 40 points on it. So one of the things that I thought was sort of wrong about that is that people have natural proclivities, and certain people don't necessarily gravitate towards fiction. And so what that type of system ranking does, of points and stuff, what that does is sort of incentivize people to read fiction novels. Because if you're trying to get higher points, because it looks good, you get all these rewards that you're incentivized with if you get higher points in AR systems, right? So it incentivizes you to go towards fiction books. And if you struggle with reading fiction novels, then that's going to be sort of that's a bad way to go about it, right? So I remember reading a lot of nonfiction books when I was really young in elementary school, reading a lot of books about like sharks and, ocean life and about weather and about natural occurring, like things like hurricanes, like more weather stuff, right? Extreme weather. I read about things like, a lot of animal stuff, because that's mostly what's available to kids like in elementary school. But I would read a bunch of those books, and I still remember being like, man, I read like 30 books this year, and I don't have nearly as many points as someone who's read like 10 books this year. What's going on here? Well, turns out they read some fiction novels that were worth higher points than all my nonfiction books. And so at first I was like, well, that's sort of weird. I mean, we're kind of reading the same amount of books, but now we're starting to make qualitative judgments on, well, fiction's more dense and it's more abstract and requires more thought. It's like, okay, in certain fictions, that's true. Like the greatest fictions of all time, I've got one that I think is really one of the best fictions, which is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. So I understand how fiction can be very intellectually abstract and cool and wonderful. I think things like, I'm going to catch a lot of shit for this, but like things like the Bible, I'm not trying to call the Bible like fiction, but stories with morals to them that are one of the deepest fictions and myths of our time. They can lie at the root of our culture, and they can lie at the root of why we do certain things. So I'm not discounting fiction as irrelevant or not important. What I'm saying is that certain people have a natural proclivity for things like nonfiction, and actually would be better off being rewarded and incentivized to pursue that type of behavior because it suits them naturally. So let's say you have an engineer that's trying to learn more about the real world and learn about facts about the objective world. And he has that inclination early on, or she has that inclination early on, and they both, whoever, start to pursue that, but then they learn that by pursuing that, they're falling behind their other peers in AR points and things like that. Now, I'm not saying AR points are the total summation of someone's education, right? But it has a sort of weird psychological effect where it's incentivizing people to do things counter to what their proclivity of personality, their personality's proclivity, would lead them towards. And so I think there's a slight bend towards things like fiction and artsy things when we should also instill a drive to pursue things like nonfiction in young people, because those could be like the engineers that come up with the devices that take all the plastic out of our ocean and solve other kinds of great problems that we face in the modern world. And I feel like that's de-incentivized by not offering an equal footing when it comes to points to AR systems. All in all, I think the AR point system needs a little bit of updating. That's a really minor one, but let's go to this next one. I said it was important because I feel like I remember a lot of my friends who were doing well in the AR points, they had a sort of like a holier than thou attitude towards the people who didn't. And it was sort of one of those weird side effects of like, okay, you read more books. And then I remember having my own personal like, man, this is sort of like, if I don't get enough points to get a reward or something, it feels like I've failed something. It's like it's making me feel bad for something I have no reason to feel bad about. It's just I don't prefer fiction, and I don't read things like that had the higher points. I read things like about earthquakes and tornadoes and things of that nature. So it had nothing to do with better or worse, but according to that ranking system, it can put kids in that perspective. Now, that's a personal anecdote from my own experiences. I've had recapitulations of the same type of story from other people. So I know it's not just me, but I'm not saying that it's widespread, obviously, because it's anecdotal. But I think that's one little aspect, but I think it can play a part into people's psyche, especially, the youngest of the kids in elementary school. Because this is happening in like 1st through 6th grade or 7th grade, depending on where you live, right? Now, what are the other things that need reform? Well, this is sort of a glaring... We need more financial education in school. I don't understand why this isn't like obvious, already been implemented for like 100 years, and we don't have a well-refined system on how to teach people about money. Unless you're willing to argue that there's been a quote-unquote, whether it's knowing or unknowing conspiracy to keep people uninformed about money. Who knows, right? I'm not saying that there is a conspiracy theory, and I'm not saying there's not, but I'm saying that there's something shady and crappy going on with the fact that no kids are being taught hardly anything about money. Money is being taught as it's sort of like a bad thing to pursue, and to want to pursue money is a bad idea. And in high school, I remember having to go through something called personal financial literacy, and I thought, this is awesome. I'm going to learn a little bit about money. Thank goodness. That was for 5 months, so I think they call it, that's a semester, so it was a semester course. The next semester was Oklahoma history, so I live in Oklahoma, so it was required. The fact that we don't have multiple years of financial literacy with a stratum of education like we have, like math, where it goes all the way from like pre-algebra all the way up to calculus and to statistics and all that kind of stuff, right? So like, we've got these sort of gradations of complexity for all these other topics, but it's just personal financial literacy where you learn how to sign a check, and that's pretty much it. Like, that's all I really remember of value from that particular class. Now, I've got other financial knowledge from a lot of these books that I've bought, but that's where most of my financial knowledge came from, was from books, not from my teachers, which, maybe it's a good thing, because what did teachers know about money? I mean, they're teachers. They've lived their life to pursue a certain mode of being that doesn't really require that you're creative to figure out ways of acquiring revenue streams, and it's just not sort of in the playbook of a teacher. So for someone to teach financial literacy, you want someone who's actually made money in the real world, doing something like owning a business, owning a bunch of real estate, dealing with stocks and bonds and things of that nature. You want to talk to people who have actually made money, to talk to them and learn how money works. Right, and then you want to teach kids that. But there's a lot of like ethical issues because people have misused financial knowledge, right? That we had a huge crash in '08 because of derivatives. We had derivatives of derivatives of derivatives that sort of just over leveraged banks, and it was a whole mess, right? And the language gets all topsy and turvy, and if you want like an entry level, like what happened in 2008, I would recommend a book called The Big Short. It also has a movie, which is really, really good. I definitely recommend checking that out if you're not familiar with what exactly happened with mortgage-backed securities in 2008 and before, which led up to all that kind of crap. So check that if you haven't. But we don't have any sort of fundamental knowledge about why something like that may have happened, right? Kids get thrown out into the real world where something like that could happen and could happen to them. They could be preyed upon by people if they're not aware of what actually happened. And then they're kind of confused as to why things are sort of messed up. It's like, well, we haven't been taught about how money works, so you're not making any money. So you think it's because the system is corrupt, but it's like because you weren't taught the proper skill sets, right? Now, there's obviously a case to be made that there are people who misuse financial knowledge and people who use it ethically and make money, and it's not a big deal, right? But what happens is we conflate the two sometimes in the public education system. It's like, well, you start dealing with money, you start dealing with, shady whoever's, which is true. Sometimes you do run into shady people. They say more money, more problems. That's once, like, put it this way, I've done real estate dealings, and you'd be surprised at, like, when you go to close on real estate, how many hands start coming out trying to get money out of your transaction. It's ridiculous. So yeah, more money, more problems, more hands start coming out trying to get your money. But we're not taught any of these lessons. We're not taught any of the defensive moves or the offensive moves that we could be making with money, investments, assets, and, leveraging liabilities, things of that nature, okay? Like, we're not taught anything of this in school, and it needs to be taught. And I think this would be a huge fundamental shift when it comes down to, like, reforming education for our entire population, because you need to understand how money works. It's one of the few, like, tangible currencies that we can, like, I think, what did Eric Weinstein say? He said, I think it's scalable, or fungible. He used one of these words, I can't recall. But basically, money, what we have right now with cash and money, it's not great, and there's a huge problem with inflation. But it's the best system of currency that we've got so far. Now, some people are into Bitcoin. I have a little bit of investment in Bitcoin myself, not a whole lot. But, it's an exciting technology, but it's not time-tested. So I'm a little skeptical about investing a whole bunch into Bitcoin. But, who knows? It may turn out to be something that we totally shift our currency to. But until that day comes, I really think the system we have is good. We just need to make some fundamental changes to how the Federal Reserve handles money. Now, this is starting to go into more of an economic conversation. Let's kind of bring it back a little bit more towards the education stuff, which I wanted to talk about mostly today. But to sum a lot of that up, teach kids about money. Oh my gosh. There's so many great fundamental books about finance that some of them are more like anecdotal, like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And then there's some that are a little bit more technical, right? Like Intelligent Investor and stuff like that, right? So, which is a book right here. What you should do is provide people with the tools they need to operate in the real world. Not everyone is going to be a mogul, big business mogul, real estate mogul, whatever. But everyone needs to know how to balance their finances, make sure that they know what an asset is, they know what a liability is versus just debt and income, right? Things of that nature. Learning little bits of terminology that can just get you through, your life without being taken advantage of financially and making stupid financial decisions, right? You have so many kids that are like, well, how come I'm not a millionaire? Well, it's like, you're not doing the things millionaires do, And so we haven't taught them the skill sets that millionaires and people of that nature who've done it ethically. Not a question of ethics here. It's a question of skills, and we're not giving people the skills they need. And I think that's really what school should be about. It should be about giving people skills or cultivating skills that already exist. Right? Now, I remember there was something that was kind of funny when it comes to education, but semi-serious, I guess. Kanye West was talking to President Trump about education reform and saying stuff like, we need to be mixing, mathematics and basketball and things of that nature, which I have no idea whether that would be a valid pursuit or not. But I think his creative thinking is somewhat in the ballpark of what we need to do. What he's saying is we need innovative approaches to education, and I think that's totally valid. And there's more ways to learn than sitting in a classroom, looking up at a lecturer, taking notes. There's more ways to learn, and there's better ways to learn for certain individuals. Now, one of the things that I learned from attending like seminars about business and money and taxes and things of that nature is that you retain about 80% more when you're able to speak the information, see the information, and write the information. If you attack it from those three angles, you have a better chance of remembering that information. But we're typically only taught, one of those techniques is only implemented very scarcely, right? It's like we're not throwing all three at the students, and you're like, who does better with this? Who learns better this way? And not necessarily separating students by how they learn, but at least giving people who learn differently ways to learn that cultivate their brains and their personalities, right? Instead of having to mold and totally change something that's not intrinsic to their way that they learn naturally, right? Or at least learn the most efficiently, right? Because everyone could learn using these techniques. You could learn just through seeing the information, repetition would help. You could learn just through speaking the information. You could learn through just writing the information. But wouldn't it be better if you could just really retain the information, have an 80% chance of retaining the information by taking all three approaches, right? None of these things are really implemented, at least they weren't implemented from my recollection going through school, whether it was elementary, junior high, or high school, right? It's just a very simplified format of you just got to do it, you just got to do it, you just got to do it, right? Sorry, it's not perfect, but you just got to do it. Now, I respect that to an extent. Like, you can't just not do things because they're not perfect. You can't not have a school system just because it's not a perfect school system. Just like you can't have, you can't say we can't have a country based on these principles just because the country has some issues. It's like, okay, why don't we just try to resolve the issues before we start attacking the core, right? So when it comes down to it, skill set is the most important thing, and we need to be focusing on teaching children skills. Because once you cultivate a skill or teach a child a skill, you watch their personality grow as they try to become the type of person that could reach the goals they want to reach. That's one of the most beautiful things I've noticed as a music teacher, watching people who I've looked right in their eyes as they said, listen, this is probably not going to happen for me. I'm blank, I'm Y, I'm X, I'm whatever. It's probably not going to work for me. And then seeing their faces light up when they actually accomplished something they had no idea they could do. All they needed to do was have the right skills put in front of, the right tools, I should say, put in front of them to accentuate their skills and bring them to life, right? That's what a teacher should be doing. What are teachers doing now? This is my third big complaint when it comes to the education system. We have teachers that are not teaching. We have teachers that are preaching. And this is a big, big issue, okay? We don't need our teachers to impose their moral structures, their values, onto their students, all right? What we need is teachers who teach children how to think, not what to think. Right now we're having more of the latter and less of the former. All right, we need to teach kids, I'll say it again, not what to think, but how to think, right? You need to be able to teach them the cognitive toolkits. They need to have a cognitive toolkit that allows them to see things that are complex clearly, right? Instead of basically throwing people out in the ocean with no raft and saying swim. Swim in any direction you want. It's like we need to give them the skills and the knowledge that allows them to succeed, right? But we have teachers that are preaching their values and trying to ignore curriculum to teach fake history, fake, philosophy, fake psychology, fake all this stuff. It's ridiculous. So the first thing that should happen, I'm sorry, I think at this point, you have a bunch of kids, very susceptible minds in a room, and you're just by yourself with them. We should trust our teachers, absolutely, but we can't take any chances, and we should at least have some sort of monitoring system that's like, it's not designed to like, hey, you derailed from the curriculum just a little bit, we're gonna punish you. I don't think it needs to be that extreme. I think it needs to be, you derailed from the curriculum a little bit, but you were doing it to make a broader point about the curriculum or about something that was relevant, so that's totally fine. But this teacher over here started talking about, intersectionality and hardcore feminism and stuff like that. And it's like, wait a second, we don't need to be mixing those types of things up, right? So I think it would be good to have some sort of system where we have a fail-safe that prevents ideologically possessed teachers from influencing young minds. Now, thank God about the information age is that there's so much information out there. Most people who get fed bullshit could probably figure out that it's bullshit by looking it up. But that's becoming harder and harder. And what do I mean by that? Is, well, Google is starting to put up what would you call them, algorithmic sensors or keywords that sort of disproportionately represent things. So what do I mean by this? There's a great book called The Madness of Crowds by Douglas Murray where he outlines how, and I did the same test that he did in the book and got the same results. So I can at least say from my perspective, his test was valid. If you go into Google and you type in things like black male, Asian male, Latino male, Indian male, Arabic male, you type in these words and you just see like the standard like Shutterstock stock images, of people just, black men, Latino men, so on and so forth, right? But you type in white men, all of a sudden the first things that pop up are like angry white men and all these mug shots of white men, and there's white, whiteness, white studies, white privilege, and all these things start to pop up, and it's like, wait a second, that's a weird algorithmic prejudice, is that white males pops up completely differently than all the others. You should just get Shutterstock images of white guys just like you got black guys, just like you got Latino guys, just like you got Asian guys. Right now, one thing I should say, the Asians, when I did my test, the Asians were the other category that seemed to be the most different from all the other ones. Like black, Latino, Indian, Arabic had a uniformity when it came to how the algorithm presented those relevant links. But white and Asian, for some reason, had different ones. And both of them, when they devolved from the basic Shutterstock, really just basic information, it was immediately negative, political, Asians are acting out the model minority thing and why Asians should be considered just as bad as white people. Like, those articles start popping up when you start talking about Asian men. And then, you get what I talked about earlier with the white men. So I was like, okay. Another test was gay couple, straight couple. You type in gay couple, just a lot of pictures of happy gay couples, and there it is. And then you type in straight couple, and you get pictures of gay couples, and stories of how straight couples became gay couples, and broke up. And so it's like, why are we not getting an equal algorithmic representation unless there's some sort of filtering going on? Now, there's something called machine learned fairness. Machine learned fairness. That's basically what's being implemented. So if you had something like, let's say, physics that was predominantly occupied by white European men, not saying that's who all physicists were, because that's not true, but the biggest figureheads that we know of, Albert Einstein, Newton, all these kind of guys, right? Francis Bacon, yada, yada, yada. Bunch of old white dudes. So machine learned fairness would present an image of like a black woman, right, from that time period to correct for the privilege that the overrepresentation of white males has in this particular category. So we're going to equalize it that way. So it works the other way too. So apparently, where it's like it's got white and Asian in a separate ranking system and a certain filtering that the other categories don't have, and that's because of machine learned fairness. So I kind of talked a little bit more about censorship and things like that. But when it comes back around, you have students who are being fed misinformation. They need to be able to go, look up the correct information. And so now you have information that can be very easily manipulated from one of the world's most popular search engines, probably the most popular search engine. So this is a big deal, guys. We're kind of facing something that we have never really dealt with before. And the best thing I would recommend is not necessarily homeschooling, but you just essentially prep your kids culturally before they enter the public school system. They need to know about things like money. They need to have social skills. They need to have all these things before they go into school, at least nowadays, because school systems now do not have the tools necessary to guarantee that everyone that goes through the school system is going to understand how the world works, has a good, grasp on what they're going to do inside of that real world, how they're going to be productive citizens and make a living for themselves. none of that's considered. We need to make sure that that becomes a priority and that we don't have teachers that are sort of indoctrinating students by not. I've seen videos of people who have said with a camera in their face that they ignore the curriculum so that they can teach about like Project 1619 and things of that nature. That's totally inappropriate. I've met, unfortunately, friends of mine who became teachers say things like, "Oh, I saw that the students were looking up about the colonists," and I said, "Listen, all you need to know about the colonists is that colonists were bad. Okay, when you think colonists bad." She literally said that to her students who are in early first through third grade, right? So, and I messaged her and I said, "You can't be doing this, girl. You can't be imposing your values on your students. That's not right. They need to be able to come to their own conclusions based off the facts of the situation." And she's like, "I'm a new teacher. I'm still learning. Thanks for letting me know. I'm trying to do my best," which is fine. That's great that she's open about that, which is better the reactions than I expected from some people that I have confronted about that. So that was nice, but I noticed that she still shares very radical information that's totally not founded in anything in reality. It's completely propaganda. But then again, that makes me think, how many teachers right now are being fed misinformation, think it's signal information, and are teaching that to their students? That's a big problem, all right? And so those are the main things that I have an issue with. I feel like to summarize all 3 points, the incentive structure for certain internal things in school, like AR system points, need to be revalued and sort of not favor one particular personality type, but actually accommodate for all the different ways that people learn and the interests that people have, because not everyone's going to like Harry Potter and want to read these thick novels about fiction about something that isn't real. Some people want to go read about space and want to read about the ocean and want to read about all the weather and whatever it happens to be. You have people that are nonfiction type people, and we should not privilege one category over the other. Sounds very postmodernist, right? No, but I'm saying that in a sense because there have been negative repercussions. I've seen, at least, and experienced some of it firsthand in myself and other people. And so I think it makes people think, like, I'm just going to make a brief point on that first statement I made. I remember thinking for a long time, I guess I'm just not a reader. I guess reading is just not for me. Not that I couldn't read. I was literate. Like, I could read words and write just fine. But as far as, like, pursuing books to read them recreationally, I just thought, that's just not really me. Why do you think that, Dax? Well, obviously in school, the AR system point showed me that that's just not my skill set. I believed that for the longest time. Once I left the AR system points, I had a permanent mindset. Well, it's not really permanent because I don't think that anymore. But I had this mindset of, I'm not a reader. And so reading things are more difficult to me naturally because I'm not a reader. Oh, I'm not a reader, so this test is more difficult to me because I'm not a reader. Well, I've got like almost 250 books now, and I would tell you that I would consider myself a reader. Now, why did I have this false belief about myself in my head? Well, some of it comes from my personality. I am high in neuroticism, so I can take a little bit of ownership for that. But a lot of it came that I remember telling myself, man, these AR points, I just can't seem to get as many as everyone else, even though I'm doing good on these tests. I guess maybe this is just not for me, right? And I remember having those thoughts, and that's not true. As you can see behind me, the evidence is clear. I read all the time. And so things like that, the incentives inside our school system need reorganized. The propaganda needs to be taken care of. We can't have radicalized teachers indoctrinating our students with misinformation. And I'm going to put this one as the most important one. We need to teach our students about money in some capacity. We need to give them some terminology they can learn, let them know how to start a bank account, learn what their credit score is, what is an asset versus a liability versus income versus debt. Do investors, business people, self-employed or small business people and employees have to pay different taxes? The answer is yes. And figuring out which one pays which percentage and how do they figure that and all that sort of. We need to be teaching kids these things because these are things that are going to allow them to take their passions, take the things that they feel in their bones, and actually make something productive out of it. Something that they can actually use to not only benefit society, but also benefit themselves as well by creating a business that offers a service or any other type of venture that allows you to take your creative capacities, monetize them into something that is, well, tangible, that you can use to make your life better and not have to stress so much about money, because money is one of the biggest things people stress about nowadays, or throughout time, frankly. So we've got to teach kids the skills that they need so that they can avoid those pitfalls, those mental pitfalls, right? Because if you think to yourself, if I thought to myself, like, I guess I'm just not a reader based off what I dealt with in the school system, if I go out into the real world and I've developed this sort of mindset and I'm not able to get money, am I going to start thinking things like, well, I guess making a whole bunch of money just isn't for me, or hardly making any money, I'm just going to grind forever? These are the type of mindsets that people are entering the real world with. So this one was kind of an off-the-cuff rant. I didn't have any sort of script or anything on this one. I just sort of went off the cuff, like I said. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off there. We can talk a little bit more about the education system in the comment section. Another place we're having these type of conversations is over at Locals and Think Spots. So head on over to those communities so we can get the conversation going up over there. Again, like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate you coming to the episode today. I'm Logocentric. Thank you for watching.